patient, methodical. I do not pour concrete until the ground is prepared. On a Tuesday morning in March, I transferred $150,000 into my in-laws' bank account to save their home from foreclosure. 3 weeks later, at 2:17 in the morning, I watched my wife walk out of our front door to meet another man in my driveway. And here is the part that changes everything. By the time she sat down on our living room sofa to confess, I had already been collecting evidence for weeks. I had already filed for divorce, and I had already built something she was never going to see coming. Let me take you back to the beginning, not the dramatic part, the quiet part, because that is always where everything actually starts. I grew up on the South Side. My father laid brick for 31 years, hands like worn leather, back curved like a question mark by the time he was 50. I watched him work and I learned two things: how to build and how to be patient. I picked up my first hammer at 19. By 26, I had my contractor's license. By 32, Ellis Development Group had its first major city contract in Pilsen, the kind of neighborhood where every building has a story older than you are. Our house sits on Fullerton Avenue in Lincoln Park. 3 stories of restored brownstone, original cornices, a yellow front door that my daughter Zuri picked out when she was 4 years old. I have never once thought about changing it. She is 6 now, light brown skin, natural hair in 2 perfect puffs, 2 dimples that appear every time she smiles, which is most of the time. Everything I built, every contract, every early morning, every decision made carefully instead of quickly, I built with her in mind. Amaya and I met 11 years ago at a community fundraiser in Bronzeville. She was wearing a burgundy dress, laughing at something her friend had said, and the sound of it carried clear across the room. We dated for 2 years. We married on a September afternoon at Trinity United Church of Christ on 95th Street. And for a long time, what we had was genuinely real. I want to be fair about that. I want to be accurate. For a long time, what we had was real. Trinity United had given us more than a ceremony. It had given us a community, one that still felt, in many ways, like the neighborhood's long memory. In Bronzeville, the church knows things, it remembers, and it protects what it considers its own. I did not know, in those early years, how much that would matter later. Her parents, Ifua and Derek Brooks, live on South King Drive in Bronzeville. Derek worked freight logistics for 28 years before his back gave out. Ifua cleaned offices downtown until her knees said otherwise. Good people. Quiet lives. Not the kind of people who asked for much. Which is why, when Amaya came to me in February with the news that her parents were 60 days from losing their home, I did not hesitate. The number was $150,000. Missed payments, accumulated interest, a home equity loan that had quietly gone sideways over 3 years. I spent 2 evenings with their documents. I ran the numbers 3 times. Then I called my attorney. What I did not tell Amaya is that I had those papers drawn up as a formal loan agreement, signed by Amaya, signed by Ifua and Derek, secured against the Bronzeville property, witnessed, notarized, and filed with Cook County Circuit Court. I want to be honest about what that decision was and what it was not. It was not a trap. At that point, I was not specifically suspicious of Amaya. What I was, after 15 years of building things professionally, was a man who understood that love and legal clarity are not opposites. I had seen contracts worth millions collapse on the strength of handshakes and good intentions. I was not going to leave Zuri's financial future dependent on a feeling, regardless of how solid that feeling seemed on a Tuesday morning in March. So I protected the asset, the way I always protected the things that mattered most. The morning I wired the money, Ifua Brooks held my face in both hands and called me the realest man this family had ever known. Derek gripped my hand with both of his, eyes wet, unable to find the words. That night, my wife pressed her face into my chest in our bedroom on Fullerton and whispered, I don't know what I would do without you. I held her. I said nothing. For about 3 weeks after that, everything felt like it had been the right call. Then, at 2:17 on a Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a Ring camera notification. I almost ignored it. The alert log usually meant a raccoon near the bins or a package left on the porch. But something made me open the app. Andre Lang's BMW was parked in my driveway. My wife was walking out of our front door in a jacket pulled over her pajamas. I watched the full clip without moving. When it ended, I set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark for a long time, looking at the ceiling of the room we had shared for 6 years. In the morning, I saved the footage, time-stamped, backed up to a private cloud account she did not know existed. I did not confront her. Not yet. There were still pieces I needed to collect. And the man who pours concrete before the ground is ready ends up with a foundation that cracks under the first real pressure. Stay with me, because what Amaya said to me 5 weeks later, sitting on our living room sofa with trembling hands, is the moment this story begins to turn. She chose a Wednesday night to tell me. Zuri was asleep upstairs. The brownstone on Fullerton was quiet the way old houses get quiet in April, settling into itself, the wind off Lake Michigan pressing slow and steady against the windows. I was at the kitchen table reviewing permit applications when Amaya came down the hallway and lowered herself onto the sofa across the room. She did not turn on the lamp. She sat in the half-dark with her hands folded in her lap, very still in the way a person is still when they are holding themselves together entirely from the outside in. The coffee I had made an hour earlier was sitting cold on the counter. Somewhere upstairs, the old radiator ticked once and went quiet. I set down my pen. Xavier, her voice came out rough, like she had been rehearsing it too long and the words had worn down. I need to tell you something. I waited. I've been seeing someone. She exhaled it all at once. For 4 months. It's Andre. Andre Lang. From my office. Andre Lang, Vice President of Operations at the River North firm where Amaya had worked for 3 years. 42 years old. The kind of man who treats every room like an audition. She started to cry then. Not the composed, manageable kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below the surface. The kind that sounds like a person discovering the floor has given way beneath them without warning. I did not move toward her. I did not reach for her hand. I sat with what she had just said and let it be the size it actually was, which was considerable, even for a man who had known it was coming. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about preparing for the worst. Knowing does not protect you from feeling it when the words are finally spoken out loud. The Ring camera footage had been data. This was something different. This was the room where we had built our life, and the woman I had married 11 years ago, and the sentence that meant it was over. I stood and walked to the window. I looked out at Fullerton Avenue for a moment. The streetlights, a late bus moving south, the wet reflection of light on the pavement after the earlier rain. Then I turned back. How long? I asked. 4 months, she said. It started in November. November. Exactly 3 weeks after I wired the money. I didn't plan it, she said, her voice still unsteady. I felt like I owed you something I didn't know how to give back, Xavier. Carrying that feeling, I didn't know what to do with it. And Andre was just there. He paid attention to me. Here is something worth understanding, because this story is not only about betrayal. It is about a specific psychological pattern that quietly erodes marriages long before anyone speaks a word out loud. Psychologists call it the dependency to devaluation cycle. It works like this. One partner makes a significant sacrifice, financial, emotional, or both. That act of sacrifice temporarily relieves pressure the other person was carrying. But relief, counterintuitively, can create distance rather than closeness. The partner who was helped begins to feel unconsciously indebted, and indebtedness is uncomfortable. Over time, rather than sitting with the vulnerability of needing someone, some people begin, without fully realizing it, to resent the person they depend on. They find reasons to pull away. They reframe the generous partner as suffocating or distant or simply not enough. Amaya did not fall into Andre's orbit because she stopped loving me. She drifted there because being saved felt, to her, like being owned. Andre offered her the sensation of choosing freely, of wanting something on her own terms. That is not an excuse for what she did, but understanding it helped me respond from clarity rather than from the kind of rage that burns everything down, including the things worth keeping. "I hear you," I said. And I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I understood the psychology of what she was describing. And I was not going to insult either of us by pretending I didn't. Then I walked to the credenza near the front window. The one Amaya had always used to sort mail and papers. The one where she had never once opened the bottom drawer. I pulled out my phone first. I opened the Ring camera application. I turned the screen toward her and pressed play. 2:17 a.m. Andre's BMW in my driveway. My wife walking out of our front door in a jacket over her pajamas. The long goodbye at the driver's side window. The kiss. Amaya went the color of ash. Her mouth opened once and closed without sound. "I came back early from a site visit," I said quietly. "Parked down the block." I needed to confirm what I had already suspected. I put the phone back in my pocket. That was 5 weeks ago. She looked at me like she was seeing a different man than the one she thought she had walked in on. "You knew," she whispered. "I knew enough," I said. And I spent the time since then making sure I knew the rest. I reached into the credenza and pulled out a manila folder. I set it on the coffee table between us. "Credit card statements," I said. "An account in your name opened last July. Linked to your work email address, which is why it never appeared in our shared account overview." I opened the folder and turned the top page toward her. $14,500. 6 months of charges. Restaurants in the Gold Coast. 2 nights at the Langham on North Wabash. A weekend in Indianapolis you told me was a work conference. Her hand came up slowly to cover her mouth. "I paid every statement the month it arrived," I said, without saying a word. I wanted to see whether, at any point, you would come to me on your own. "Xavier." "You didn't," I said. Not with anger, with the plain, quiet weight of something true. Not once. That choice, to pay those statements silently rather than confront immediately, was not weakness. Behavioral researchers call it strategic observation. When you sense a betrayal, but do not yet hold the complete picture, confronting early often drives the other person underground. They become more careful, more guarded, and the truth becomes harder to reach intact. But if you hold your position, if you stay steady and allow things to continue on their natural timeline, the full truth surfaces undisturbed, clean, documented, exactly as it is. You are not reacting when the moment finally arrives. You are presenting. That is what those 5 weeks had been. Not suffering in silence, preparing in silence. There is a meaningful difference between those two things, and that difference is everything. "Now look at the second document," I said. She reached for it carefully, like someone who has recently learned to be cautious about what she picks up. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading. Then her eyes moved to the signature lines at the bottom, and she understood immediately. Her signature, her mother's, her father's. That is a loan agreement, I said, filed with Cook County Circuit Court 6 weeks ago. The $150,000 was not a gift. It was a secured loan, collateralized against the Bronzeville property, notarized and recorded. I paused. I structured it that way not because I suspected you specifically. I did it because I was not going to leave Zuri's financial future unprotected, regardless of what happened between us. That is the kind of man I am, Amaya. I thought you knew that. She set the document down. Her hands would not stay still. You came to me tonight, I said quietly, because you thought the confession would let you control the story. You thought I would be hurt, and we would have a painful conversation, and eventually things would settle on your terms. I held her gaze. But the terms were already in place, long before tonight, long before that sofa. She looked at me across the coffee table. Really looked. And I watched the exact moment she understood that the man sitting across from her was not who she thought she had married. Not because I had changed, but because she had never looked carefully enough to see who I actually was. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Let me show you," I said. "Before we go any further, I need to ask you something honest. If your spouse came to you and confessed an affair, would you want to know every detail all at once? Or would you rather be protected from part of the truth? Drop yes or no in the comments. Or tell me, has someone you deeply trusted ever confessed something that permanently changed how you saw them?" Because what Xavier pulls out of that folder next is something Amaya never once prepared for. And it is going to make you rethink who was actually in control of this marriage from the very beginning. She tried the family card first. I had expected that. "You cannot do this," Amaya's voice climbed, her composure finally cracking at its edges. "My parents will lose that house. My mother is 58 years old, Xavier. Where is she supposed to go?" I let her finish. "Nobody is losing their home," I said. "The loan agreement has a structured repayment schedule. I am not calling the note today. I am telling you it exists because you need to understand the full landscape before you decide how you want to proceed." "And if I fight the divorce?" I reached into the folder. There are moments in a hard conversation where the room contracts, where everything slows down just slightly and becomes very precise. This was one of those moments. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. Amaya picked it up. She read the first 2 lines. Then she read them again. It was a printed text message, dated, authenticated by my attorney. From Pastor Reginald Williams of New Covenant Baptist Church on South Michigan Avenue in Bronzeville, the same congregation the Brooks family had attended for 22 years. The same church where Amaya had been baptized, where our wedding reception had filled the fellowship hall with music and the smell of good food and people who loved us. The message read, "Brother Xavier, we are praying for you and little Zuri. The Board of Elders has been informed of the situation, and we stand with you. If there is anything this congregation can do, legal support, counsel, or simply being present, you have only to ask." The paper began to tremble between Amaya's fingers. "Pastor Williams knows?" Her voice had gone somewhere hollow. "Elder Morris reached out to me 3 weeks ago," I said. "Andre Lang has a history in that community that several of the elders were already aware of, though I was not until Elder Morris called. When I told Pastor Williams I was considering filing, he initiated the rest of the conversation himself. I did not ask him to reach out. He did it because that congregation has always known what it looks like to stand for what is right, and what it looks like when it isn't. What Amaya was experiencing in that moment has a specific name. Researchers call it a social safety net collapse, and it is often more psychologically devastating than any legal consequence. Here is why. Most people who make harmful choices in a marriage do not fully reckon with the community architecture surrounding them. They assume certain relationships will stay neutral: the church, the mutual friends, the family circle. They design their exit around those assumed neutralities, planning to step out of the marriage and directly into a waiting network of people who will hold them, affirm them, help them build a new story. When those pillars shift, the impact is not just emotional, it is identity level. Amaya had not simply lost a husband. She had lost the version of this story she had planned to tell, the one where she was a woman who had finally chosen herself. Without an audience for that story, the story itself collapsed. What remained underneath it was something much harder to live with: the unmediated truth of what she had actually done and who had been watching. She set the paper down with the deliberate care of someone who no longer trusts her own hands. "You planned all of this," she said. "No," I said. "I prepared. That is a different thing. Planning implies I wanted this outcome. I wanted none of this. What I did was make sure that if events continued moving in the direction they were already moving, Zuri and I would not be left standing on open ground with nothing underneath us." "You keep coming back to Zuri." "Yes." "Why does everything come back to her?" "Because," I said, "she is the reason any of this matters." I reached into the folder one final time. The last document was the thickest. I placed it on the table without ceremony. Just set it there, the way you set something down that speaks entirely for itself. Amaya picked it up slowly. It was a multi-page LLC filing, Ellis Family Holdings, registered with the Illinois Secretary of State. She turned through the pages carefully, looking for the sentence that would tell her what she was actually holding. She found it on page 4. The clause was clearly marked. "Ellis Family Holdings," she read, her voice going flat and distant. 60% equity interest transferred into irrevocable trust for Zuri Amara Ellis, dated... She stopped, looked up at me. "This is dated 8 months ago." "Yes." 8 months ago, you were already protecting my daughter's future," I said, "regardless of what happened between you and me." She kept reading. Then she reached the secondary clause. She read it twice. Then she set the papers down and pressed both palms flat against the table to steady herself. I want to stop here, because this is where the story moves beyond betrayal and into something worth carrying with you. What I built inside that LLC structure was not a trap. It was a firewall. In both law and engineering, a firewall means the same essential thing: a structure that prevents damage from spreading from one area into everything else you have built. There is a concept in estate planning called asset protection architecture, the deliberate legal arrangement of wealth so that no single point of failure can compromise the whole. Most people apply this only to business risk. I applied it to my family. But here is the psychological layer beneath the legal one, and this is the part I want you to hold. When the people you love are protected not by your promises, not by their hope in you, but by a structure that exists independent of anyone's feelings or failures, you can respond to crisis from a place of absolute calm. You do not need to win the argument. You do not need the other person to agree. The work has already been done. The foundation was poured before the storm arrived. That calm was what Amaya kept misreading as coldness. It was not coldness. It was the composure of a man who had already finished the most important work before the hardest conversation began. The secondary clause stated in plain language, in the event that either party made a fraudulent or unauthorized claim against Ellis Family Holdings assets during or following dissolution proceedings, including any attempt to access, encumber, or litigate against trust assets without trustee authorization, Full fiduciary control of the LLC would revert solely to the trustee until Zuri reached the age of 25. Ellis Family Holdings held the promissory note on the Bronzeville property. If Amaya's attorneys filed fraudulent claims against the company assets, a not uncommon tactic in high-asset divorces, the clause would activate. Control of that note would move into the irrevocable trust. Her parents' home would no longer be negotiable territory. It would be held in trust for Zuri, and Amaya would have no standing to intercede. She could not lose her parents' home simply by disagreeing with me in court. She could lose it only by instructing her attorneys to make false claims against what belonged to our daughter. The distinction mattered. I needed her to understand it precisely. She had walked into this conversation believing she was about to confess, take her consequences gracefully, and negotiate from the moral high ground of honesty. Instead, she was sitting across from 8 months of quiet, deliberate, legally sound preparation. Every piece in place, every contingency considered, every document filed before she ever sat down on that sofa. "I thought," she started. "I know what you thought," I said, not unkindly. "You thought I was a good man who was too trusting to see it coming." She closed her eyes. "You have 72 hours, I said. "Get your own attorney. I genuinely mean that. Read every page carefully. Then tell me how you want to move forward." I stood, gathered my permit applications from the kitchen table. "Zuri has a dentist appointment Thursday morning," I said. "I'll take her." I walked out of the room. Behind me, there was no sound except the quiet of a house that had already decided what it was going to become. What Amaya did in those 72 hours, and what I revealed about her father that she never once expected, is the piece of this story that will change how you understand everything that came before it. By the second night of that 72 hours, Amaya had called her mother. I knew because Afua called me at 9:47 p.m., her name appearing on my phone screen while I stood at the kitchen counter making Zuri's lunch for the next morning. Peanut butter and honey on whole wheat. Zuri's standing, non-negotiable order. I let it ring. The following morning, Amaya appeared in the kitchen while I was loading Zuri's backpack. She had not slept. You could see it, not in her appearance, which was composed, but underneath it, in the specific exhaustion of a person whose mind has been rearranging things all night that they thought were settled. Outside, the April light was thin and gray. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the banana bread Zuri and I had made 2 days earlier, still sitting on the counter in a plastic bag. "I want to talk about Zuri," Amaya said. Zuri was upstairs getting dressed. We could hear her singing to herself, some cartoon melody rendered entirely in her own phonetic interpretation of the lyrics. "All right," I said. "If this goes the way you're describing—" She paused to steady herself. "She is going to grow up without her mother in the house. Do you understand what that does to a little girl? And you are willing to do that to her?" I want to name what was happening in that moment, because it is one of the most psychologically layered dynamics in any divorce involving children, and understanding it is the only way to respond to it without losing your footing. Researchers who study high-conflict separations describe a pattern called instrumental parenthood, a situation where a child's well-being is raised not only out of genuine love, but simultaneously as a strategic position in a negotiation. The parent almost always does love the child, and in that same breath, they are using the child's vulnerability as leverage. Both things are true at once. That is what makes it so difficult to respond to and so critical to address clearly, without anger, without matching the emotional temperature. Responding with rage would have been natural. It also would have been the wrong move, because anger would have shifted the conversation from structure to emotion, and structure was the only thing that would actually protect Zuri long-term. "Zuri will have full and meaningful access to both of her parents," I said, keeping my voice level. "The agreement I am proposing gives you a shared parenting arrangement. Zuri's primary residence will be here with me, but you will have regular, structured time with her. Consistent, protected, written into the agreement so neither of us can use it as a bargaining chip later. I looked at her directly. What the agreement does not allow is for Zuri to become a negotiating position. I need you to understand the difference between those two things. Amaya's jaw tightened. I am her mother. Yes, I said, and nothing I have done is designed to take that from her. But I need you to honestly consider who has been making decisions around this child's future, and who has been making decisions around their own comfort. She looked away. The refrigerator hummed. Upstairs, Zuri's singing continued, unaware. There is one more thing, I said. I went to the credenza and retrieved the final folder, the one I had kept separate from the others, held back specifically for this moment because this one required a different kind of care. She watched me return to the table with the quiet exhaustion of a woman who has run out of ways to prepare herself for the next piece of information. When I was reviewing your parents' mortgage documents before arranging the loan, I said, I found a discrepancy. The debt your father declared was $150,000. But there was a secondary obligation that was not included in the paperwork he gave you to bring to me. I opened the folder. $45,000. Gambling debts, accumulated over 14 months, owed to two separate creditors. One of them was a private lender in Calumet City who had stopped being patient. Amaya's face went completely still. Your father chose not to include those debts because he was afraid that if I saw the full picture, I would not wire the money. I let that land. He was wrong. I would have helped regardless. But I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with. Xavier. After I found the discrepancy, I contacted the lender in Calumet City privately and purchased that secondary note. Derek signed a transfer acknowledgement 2 months ago. He has been making manageable payments on an arrangement we worked out together. I paused. He asked me not to tell you. He was deeply ashamed. I want to be honest about the choice I made there, because I think it matters to this story's integrity. I kept Derek's confidence not to build a weapon against Amaya. At that stage, I had not yet decided how everything would unfold. I kept it because the man came to me privately, told me the full truth without being forced to, and asked me to let him handle it with whatever dignity he had left. He was honoring the payment arrangement. He was not interfering. I was not going to expose him to his own daughter as a punishment for a weakness he was actively working to correct. There is a difference between concealment that protects yourself and discretion that protects someone else's dignity. I knew exactly which one I was practicing. But I also want to name what Derek's situation actually was, because it speaks to something larger than this family. Psychologists call it a shame-secrecy spiral. It begins with a single poor decision, then concealment, then larger decisions made to sustain the cover. Each one compounds the original damage quietly, invisibly, until the weight of the secret becomes greater than the problem itself. Derek was not a man without character. He was a man who had been drowning in silence for over a year, and who had chosen the pain of hiding over the vulnerability of asking for help. When I bought that note, I was not acquiring leverage. I was accepting a responsibility. What I did with that responsibility was entirely my choice, and I chose patience. Amaya's eyes filled. She held herself back from letting them go. He knew, she said, barely above a whisper. My own father knew you held that debt, and he never told me? He was trying to protect you from carrying shame you didn't need, I said. Which, if you think about it carefully, is something the men in your life have been quietly doing for a long time. There was nothing she could say to that. We both knew it was true. I am not holding that debt to punish your father, I said. The arrangement is manageable. Your parents' home is secure, as long as this process moves forward honestly and without bad faith from anyone. I looked at her directly. But if your attorneys file fraudulent claims against Ellis Family Holdings assets, which does happen in high-asset divorces, and which my attorney has already prepared for, the trustee clause activates. Both notes move into the irrevocable trust. Your parents would not lose their home because I chose cruelty. They would lose it because a legal safeguard was triggered by an action I clearly warned you about. Amaya pressed both hands over her face. From upstairs, the singing had stopped. Small feet moved across the hardwood toward the stairs. I stood. I closed the folder and set it on the counter. I was done with folders. "You came to me on that sofa 2 nights ago," I said quietly, "because somewhere in you it was still the right thing to do. I believe that. I am choosing to believe that. But I need you to understand, the confession did not change the architecture. It only decided the timing." Zuri appeared at the bottom of the stairs, natural hair in 2 neat puffs, backpack half unzipped, face entirely lit by the uncomplicated morning. "Daddy," she said, "I can't find my other shoe." I turned to her, and whatever had been in my face a moment before simply left. "Where did you take it off last night?" "By the TV." "Then that is exactly where it is," I said. "Come on, we'll find it together." I walked toward the living room with my daughter. Behind me, I heard the quiet sound of my wife pulling her chair back from the table and sitting back down. Not because she had nowhere to go, but because she had finally, fully understood. Amaya had less than 24 hours left, and what she said to me at the door of this house before she walked out of it is the moment that closed something in me I did not know was still open. She signed on a Friday afternoon. Not dramatically, not with final words or tearful speeches. She arrived at my attorney's office on North LaSalle Street with her own counsel, a thorough, direct woman named Patricia Osei, and in just under 2 hours, Amaya Ellis signed her name to a dissolution agreement that was fair, clearly worded, and final. The agreement gave her a shared parenting arrangement. Zuri's primary residence would remain at the Fullerton house with me, with Amaya having regular, structured time on a protected schedule. A fair support arrangement. No claim against Ellis Development Group or Ellis Family Holdings. No fraudulent action against trust assets. The Bronzeville property remained under the original loan terms. Manageable, patient, not punitive. Patricia Osei shook my hand at the elevator on the way out. "Your client was generous," she said simply. "I know," I said. I want to be honest about what that moment actually was, because it is easy to watch a story like this build toward confrontation and assume the ending is about winning. It was not. What happened on North LaSalle Street that afternoon was what mediators and family law specialists call a structural resolution, an outcome in which both parties leave with clarity about what exists, what is owed, and what is possible going forward. Nobody receives everything. Nobody loses everything. The child remains at the center. The record is honest, and the future has room, if people choose it, to become something better than the past. That had always been the point. Not triumph. Not punishment. A structure that Zuri could grow up inside without it collapsing on her. The day my wife moved out of the Fullerton house, it was raining. Not the dramatic, theatrical kind of rain. Just a steady, quiet April rain that made the yellow front door look brighter than usual against the gray sky. She came with her sister and 2 friends I had known for years. There were no scenes, no raised voices. The house absorbed the morning quietly. I kept Zuri in the kitchen with a baking project she had been requesting for 2 weeks. Banana bread. She is 6, so what we actually produced was a considerable mess, a slightly lopsided loaf, and the best 2 hours I had spent in longer than I could remember. The front door closed for the last time at 4:20 in the afternoon. Zuri looked up from the cooling rack. "Is Mama gone?" "She went to her new place," I said, "and you are going to see her on Sunday." Zuri considered this with the particular seriousness that 6-year-olds apply to information that actually matters. Then she said, "Daddy, the bread has a crack in it." "That means it rose right," I said. She accepted this completely and went back to examining the loaf. Ifua Brooks called me 11 days later. It was a Thursday evening, just past 9 o'clock. I was on the back deck looking out at the lights spread above Lincoln Park when her name appeared on my screen. She cried for the first 2 minutes without words, just the sound of an older woman whose dignity had held this call at bay for as long as it could manage. "Xavier." Her voice, when it came, was unsteady. "We didn't know everything. I need you to believe that. We didn't know what Amaya was doing, and we didn't know about about the other matter. We found out after, and I am so ashamed." "Miss Ifua," I said, "I am not going to do anything that causes harm to you or Derek. That was never what any of this was about. You have my word." "Why?" she asked, and in that single word was years of weight. "After everything." "Because Zuri loves you," I said, "because you held my face in your hands and called me a real man, and I know you meant every word of it, and because the choices that were made in your house were not yours to answer for." I paused. "I saw the way you always made sure Zuri's coat was buttoned before she went outside, even when you thought no one was watching. You are a good woman. Let things settle. We're going to be all right. All of us."
She cried a little more. Then she steadied herself.
"I raised her better than this. I need you to know that I truly believed I raised her better."
"I know you did," I said. "People make choices for reasons they cannot always explain, even to themselves. That is not your failure. I meantime it. I genuinely, fully meant it." That was the thing that surprised me most, how little I had to reach for that generosity. It was simply there, which told me something important about where I actually was. What I was experiencing that evening has a name in psychology. Researchers who study betrayal and recovery call it narrative reclamation, the gradual process by which a person takes authorship of their own story back from the person who disrupted it.
For a long time after a betrayal, the wound sits at the center of everything. Every room holds the ghost of it. Every decision is made in reaction to what was done to you. The person who hurt you is still, in a sense, writing your story, because everything you think and feel and choose is shaped by what they did. Narrative reclamation is the moment that shifts. Not a single dramatic release, a quiet reorientation. The moment you stop reacting and start building again. Not rebuilding what was lost, but constructing something new, from cleaner materials, on ground you have tested yourself. I knew I had reached it when I realized, standing on that deck with the lights of Lincoln Park spread out below me, that I was not thinking about Amaya. I was thinking about what Zuri and I were going to do on Saturday. That was it. Small, quiet, and entirely sufficient. That night, after Zuri was asleep, I sat alone in the living room on Fullerton. The April rain had come back, still the same quiet kind, moving against the windows. The lamp threw a warm circle across the floor. The banana bread was still on the counter. The yellow front door was still the yellow front door. I was not thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what was still here. That shift, from the wound at the center of every thought to the ordinary texture of a life moving forward, that is what recovery actually looks like. Not fireworks, not a single moment of release. Just the quiet things filling the space again, one by one, until the space is full. Stay with me one more moment, because 6 months later, standing in Millennium Park with Zuri's hand in mine, I finally understood what all of it had actually been for. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday in October, Zuri and I went to Millennium Park. She wanted to see the bean. She always wants to see the bean. We have lived in this city her entire life, and she still treats Cloudgate like a miracle, running toward it across the plaza, pressing her small face flat against the cool silver surface, dissolving into laughter at the way it bends and multiplies her reflection in every direction at once. I sat on the low plaza wall and watched her. The afternoon light was doing what Chicago October light does, arriving low and golden off Lake Michigan, giving every surface a particular clarity. The kind of light that makes things look more like themselves than they usually do. A man played saxophone near the Pritzker Pavilion, something slow and without hurry. The city moved around us, easy and indifferent and magnificent. The way great cities are when you stop needing them to be anything other than what they are. I was not carrying much that afternoon. That was the thing I noticed first, the absence of weight. Not happiness exactly, something steadier than happiness. The feeling of standing on ground you prepared yourself, knowing everything underneath you, having tested every corner of it before you committed to building on it. I want to name what that feeling is, because I think it is the most important thing this entire story has actually been about. Psychologists who study men who have come through marital betrayal describe two very different long-term trajectories. The first is what researchers call ambient bitterness, a persistent, low-level anger that never fully resolves. It colors every new relationship, every new trust, every moment of potential joy. The men in this pattern survive the betrayal, but they never fully leave it. It becomes part of their identity without their permission, a permanent background noise they eventually stop noticing, but never stop carrying. The second trajectory is called post-traumatic growth. And I want to be careful here because that term can sound clinical and distant when what it actually describes is very human. It simply means this. Some people come out of the hardest experience of their lives and find themselves more fully themselves on the other side of it. More deliberate, more present, more clear about what they are building and why. Not because the pain was small, but because they made a series of active choices on the hard mornings when the bitter option was available and would have been completely understandable, to keep moving toward something rather than staying inside the wound. I knew which trajectory I was choosing, not because I am exceptional, because my daughter was watching every move I made, and the example I set in the aftermath of a broken marriage would become the template she carried into her own understanding of what love, strength, and self-respect actually look like. That was not something I was willing to get wrong. Zuri sprinted back toward me, cheeks flushed, completely satisfied with herself and the afternoon, and being 6 years old in the middle of all of it. "Daddy, my face was huge and then tiny and then upside down." "That is how it works," I said. "Why?" "Curved surface, light bends." She gave me the look she reserves for answers that are technically correct, but somehow feel like they are missing the point. Then she turned and sprinted back toward the bean to verify this independently. Because Zuri has never once taken my word for something she can test herself. I smiled, the real kind, the kind that has no audience and needs none. I do not hate my wife. I want to be precise about that because I think the precision matters here, for me, for Zuri, and for anyone listening who has been through something like this and is still deciding what to carry forward. Hatred would mean I was still inside it, still tangled. Still giving Amaya the energy that belongs to my daughter, to this work, to this life being rebuilt on Fullerton Avenue with a yellow front door and a kid who questions everything and a lopsided banana bread that rose exactly right. What I have is not hatred, it is clarity. And clarity, I have come to believe, is what love eventually becomes when the relationship it lived inside can no longer hold it. Not coldness, not indifference, just the honest, unsentimental recognition of what was real, what was not, and what each of us chose when it actually counted. She made her choices. They were costly. And I genuinely believe, that some part of her did not intend the full weight of what she set in motion. People rarely intend the full consequences of the small compromises they make along the way. They intend the immediate relief. The consequences arrive later, without warning, always larger and quieter and more permanent than expected. I made different choices, under the same pressure, in the same house, with the same uncertainty pressing in from every direction. Those choices are the reason Zuri and I are sitting in Millennium Park on a golden October afternoon, watching light bend off a silver surface, talking about how things work. Zuri came back a final time and climbed up beside me on the plaza wall without asking, just settled in against my arm, the way children do when they simply know where they belong. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." "Are you happy?" 6 years old, no preamble, no strategy, just the question, asked completely clean. I looked out at the park, the light on the water, the saxophone drifting over from the pavilion, the city turning slowly toward evening around us. "Yeah," I said. "Right now, sitting here with you, I really am." She nodded once, satisfied, as if this confirmed something she had suspected for a while. Then she hopped down from the wall, grabbed my hand without asking, and pulled me toward the bean one more time. I let her lead. This story teaches us that silence is not the absence of power. Sometimes, it is the most disciplined form of power there is. The season in which a person is measuring, preparing, and deciding, quietly and without announcement, what kind of future they are willing to build. Real love does not ask you to disappear inside it. Real partnership does not survive on one person's sacrifice while the other person searches for an exit. And the most important things we protect are not always accounts or contracts or square footage. They are the children watching us, learning from us, forming their first and deepest understanding of what strength, dignity, and self-respect actually look like. If you are the steady one who has been overlooked, the faithful one, the one who kept showing up long after the other person had already left in every way that mattered, this story is for you. Hold your ground. Do the work quietly. Let the truth move at its own pace, because it always finds its way to the surface, every single time. Thank you for being here today. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Human writers poured their soul into these scripts to expose injustice and celebrate humanity. AI served as a technical supporter, refining expressions so the valuable messages of equality, humility, and hope could reach and inspire millions. Production team: Story and Screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.